this evening will be presenting to the Park Advisory Committee. And then the introduction to the budget will go to the board in December, along with the adoption at the second meeting. And so I just wanted to make a few highlights of our budget. We're in a very different place than we were last year. Last year, we were certainly in the middle of the COVID-19 pandemic. There was a lot of uncertainty, and our budget reflected that. We had a drop in our revenues. We were very conservative in our property tax projections due to the uncertainty of what the markets were going to be doing. And this year we're in a more stable environment. The economy has shown growth in the property tax area, and employment is coming back. The housing market has held stable. And so we're in a very different place. Last year also the fires were just finishing up. Some were still just recently been burned out by this year. So it was a very, very different year. Also this year, we have a new general manager. And so we are implementing a few best practices in our budget that are a little bit different than in the past. And I think as we go through the presentation, we can highlight a few of those areas. But in general, the budget, the operating budget is put together in a similar way as it has been done in the past, where we collaborate throughout the organization. We start with a base budget that is the current level of service delivery. That is really where we are have the opportunity to start our budgeting and our operating budget, and then we can build upon that once we put in what our property tax growth has been. Since we cover 2 counties, we have been fortunate to have growth in that area, and we are able to add resources throughout the budget. And so I'm going to turn it over to Deborah and have her go through some of the high level. You've all, or all the committee members have received their proposed budget document. It's 2 volumes. It's also listed on our website for anyone that didn't get a hard copy. And we'll be going through some of the high levels, and then we'll be answering questions and digging into a few, responding to questions. So with that, I will turn it over to Deborah. I think you'll be able to share your presentation with the group.
All right. Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me okay? All right. I'm going to share my screen. And how's that?
I think just a little bit louder, and try to just articulate well into the mic you have.
I will do my best. Okay, from beginning. How's that? Sharing screen now? Good. Okay. So good morning. I'm Deborah Spalding, Assistant Finance Officer, and I'm going to present to you some highlights of our 2022 proposed budget, working with Christina Crosby, our budget manager. So to begin with some highlights, in this year, as Deborah Ocker mentioned, are able to add some resources across many different areas that we were not able to do in 2021. So just taking it from the top, we are opening up some new parklands, and these are our pipeline positions that are being added at East Shore State Park's Brickyard, at the Western Hills Open Space at Sibley, and a new staging area in Pleasanton Ridge Regional Park, sometimes known as the Tyler staging area. And we're adding an additional position for the Dumbarton Quarry Campground at Coyote Hills. In addition, we are expanding our fuels crew, adding 3 additional members, and they will be assisting with the wildfire hazard reduction and resource management plan implementation. We are also able to increase staffing across a lot of different parks in an attempt to respond to an increasing number of visitors to our parks. And so that's going to ensure that we can maintain and manage our parklands, trails, facilities, and amenities. Last bullet here, we are adding a new interpretive sector that'll be based out of Del Val Regional Park, and that will expand programming into the southeast area of the Park District, including Brushy Peak, Round Valley, Morgan Territory, and the Vasco Hills, Vasco Caves area. We are adding a swing shift at the Tilden Courtyard Equipment Shop, and that will allow us to service equipment and vehicle maintenance in a timely manner, especially addressing, we have some new equipment that has been added in the past few years for vegetation and fuels management. So that's an important addition. We are providing funding for a district-wide strategic plan and also for an information technology long-term plan. We're implementing a district-wide trails crew, which is permanently implementing a 2021 pilot program, which was begun last year with using district staffing. We're also continuing the funding for the Student Conservation Association Small Trails Crew. And we are adding additional staff for administrative functions in finance, legal risk, and human resources. And that's to respond to increasing workloads and regulatory requirements. I'm going to recap for you what our budget process is. So we begin our budget process in the beginning of the year, really. In February and March, we start with our board workshops where the board of directors meets together and they figure out what are their highest priorities, what are the goals that they have in common for the year. So those budget workshops continue through the first few months of the year. And in the finance department, we're working on our revenue projections. We have an outside consultant we use, Beacon Economics, that helps us with our property tax revenue projections. Sometime around June, we ask the divisions to put together their budget requests, and they prioritize those requests, and we then review them, looking at the amount of revenue that we expect to have. And from all those pieces of information, we create our proposed budget. And so here we are today at the Board Finance Committee, giving you an opportunity to review this proposed budget. It'll go to the Park Advisory Committee this afternoon. We'll have an all-staff budget meeting tomorrow. And then on December 7th, the first public hearing of the budget will happen. And on December 21st, we'll have the second public hearing and the adoption of the budget. Next, I'm going to talk to you about our budget balancing principles. So these are the overarching thoughts that we have as we work on deciding what to prioritize in our budget. So number one, we want to make sure that we are maintaining a financially stable and sustainable organization so that our decisions that we make today will be able to be sustained in the future. We are always pursuing our mission to restore, preserve, and protect scenic, natural, and cultural resources in a changing climate. Number three, we are working to protect our employees as an essential resource, and we are investing in their future retirement, their current well-being, and their professional development. As we implement our budget, we are addressing legal and regulatory mandates. We are serving programmatic and planned needs towards achieving our vision. And lastly, we always want to make sure that we are preserving our existing investments. So preserving our existing facilities and parklands by identifying and dedicating funding to maintaining those assets. And then the last piece of sort of overview context is our mission statement. So this really is our guiding directive. So the East Bay Regional Park District preserves a rich heritage of natural and cultural resources and provides open space, parks, trails, safe and healthful recreation, and environmental education. And an environmental ethic guides the district in all that we do. All right, next I'm going to jump into our performance plan. So shown here is this pie chart that is our district-wide performance goals. So these are 8 goals that we are working towards, and they tie back to our mission statement and to our master plan. I won't read them all through to you, but I'm going to go through and talk to you about some highlights of things that are in our budget that address these performance goals. So the first one we have here is Plan for Climate Change Resiliency. And this is a picture of Coyote Hills Regional Park, where we will be doing some work that addresses this goal. So first off, the first bullet there is to continue to prioritize land acquisition, preservation and management, acknowledging the important role that open spaces play in providing carbon sinks that mitigate the impacts of a changing climate. The next bullet there is we will be completing permitting and design for this Coyote Hills Public Access and Habitat Restoration Project. And then lastly, we'll be working on an ecological health assessment that'll be done by our stewardship department. And it's working with other agencies in the East Bay to identify the ecological health of all the lands across the East Bay that are publicly owned. Our next goal is improve access to public parklands and outreach to underrepresented groups. And so that picture there is of our East Shore State Park new Brickyard Cove area that will be opened very soon. And so that's the first bullet there. The second one is complete phase 1 improvements to expand public access at the Tidewater Day Use area at MLK Shoreline. Another project that has been ongoing for a few years and is continuing this year is to improve the facilities at Contra Loma, and particularly providing those, making those facilities more accessible. And lastly, we will be continuing the community equity assessment, which is a review of the distribution of programs and services across the diverse communities that we serve. All right, this next goal is to foster a safe visitor experience. And some of the tasks that we'll be working on are listed along the left again. So we've got this picture here is from a program that our aquatics department provides. Oh, sorry, it's the second bullet. So continue providing swim lessons and personal flotation devices for water safety. But the first bullet, so promote police department values of safety, service, and stewardship, and train all police personnel on procedural justice practices. The third bullet there, continue the district-wide hazardous tree program and provide additional training on that hazardous tree program to staff. And lastly, we will be working to secure approval of an at-grade railroad crossing of the Niles Canyon Railway for the Vargas-Garin Regional Trail. All right, here's a picture of one of our naturalists at Del Val. This year we'll be expanding interpretive and recreational services at that visitor center. We will be completing the interpretive pavilion at Shadow Cliffs Regional Recreation Area. We'll be completing the interpretive exhibits at the Sunol Visitor Center. And then lastly, launching a new Park District website and mobile applications for park and trail users. So that's a public affairs project that they've been working on. Next goal is to balance environmental considerations with outdoor recreational opportunities. And the picture you see here is of Point Malati. So we'll be working on the construction of the San Francisco Bay Trail extension to Point Malati in Richmond. We will be continuing work on land use plans in many areas of the Park District, including McKay, the master plan at Crown Memorial State Beach. And lastly, we are constructing 3 natural surface trails at Pleasanton Ridge Regional Park. This goal is to restore, preserve, and protect scenic, natural, and cultural resources. So that's our fuels crew working there. So we'll be continuing our wildfire fuels and vegetation reduction work to reduce hazardous fuels in the East Bay Hills, especially along the wildland urban interface. So as mentioned earlier, we're expanding that crew this year and continuing to work on that plan. Our stewardship department will be working to restore the San Leandro Creek at its headwaters in Sibley Volcanic Regional Preserve. We'll also be working on some projects to improve water sources for rangeland management. So those last 2 bullets are related to grazing and rangeland management, completing pond restorations, and then providing more reliable sources of water during drought and during a changing climate to support livestock grazing. And that's an ecological benefit for our parklands and for fuels management. All right, one that's near and dear to my heart, the goal to ensure fiscal health of the Park District. So this year we will be completing an information systems review and developing a long-term plan for implementing those improvements. We will continue to look for grant funding. One particular one is the regional trail projects, the RAISE grant programs, which I believe we've just submitted our application recently for. We will be issuing new Measure WW capital bonds. We'll talk more about that later on in this Finance Committee for the acquisition development of parklands, and with a portion of those bonds as green bonds. And lastly, we'll be examining the encroachment permit process to identify efficiencies and incorporate best practices and identify opportunities for cost recovery. And I believe this is the last of the goals that we're going through. So attract and retain a workforce of excellence. So this is a picture of the soon to be constructed service yard at Dumbarton Quarry / Coyote Hills. And that will help the park staff efficiently service the new campground in the park. We'll also be implementing recommendations from the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Workplace and Workforce Assessment Project to improve the diversity of the applicant pool while also maintaining a respectful workplace that promotes equal opportunities for all employees. And lastly, we'll be working with park divisions to engage district employees with a new regularly scheduled communication system. I'm now going to turn this presentation over to Christina Crosby.
Thank you, Deb. Christina Crosby, Budget Manager for the Park District. I'm going to do a broad overview of the 2022 proposed budget and just look at some of the nuts and bolts of what it is comprised of. Firstly, the 2022 proposed budget is balanced with planned expenditures, transfers, and use of funds from all funds totaling $290.4 million. Total resources are $268.3 million. This is comprised of $190 million in taxes and assessments, $33.7 in fees and charges, $2.7 million in contracts and leases, $6.7 in investment interest and philanthropic gifts, and $34.2 million in other resources. I will go into a little bit more depth on the next slide. So taxes and assessments include property tax, general obligation bonds, parcel taxes, Measure FF, and lighting and landscape districts. Property tax projections increased by 7%, determined by the county assessor's property tax rolls for fiscal year 2020 and 2021, and district consultants Beacon Economics for the second half of the calendar year based on economic trends in the Bay Area, California, and nationally. Fees and charges include park fees, concession fees, and service charges. Highlights in this area include park fees returning to pre-pandemic levels of 2019 and an increase in inter-district charges by 22% over 2021. This is a reflection of an additional $3 million to major infrastructure renovation and replacement fund, as well as higher costs for insurance premiums and general liability. Contracts and leases includes contracts, grazing, and other leases, which largely remain the same from 2021 to 2022, with some modest increases for CPI. Investments in Philanthropic includes investment earnings, foundation support, and aid from others. Pooled investment earnings decreased by 13.6% from 2021, while aid from others increased by $200,000 from the Bay Area Toll Authority, and foundation support increased for direct support to recreation and outreach programs. Other revenue reflected in this category includes a $2 million transfer from the district's pension trust to be used to reimburse for the district's CalPERS pension cost in 2022 for the first time. This is a visual representation of these revenue resources where we can see the largest share of the district's revenue come from the property tax at 82%, followed by 14% for charges and services, then the smaller categories of interagency grants and agreements, property usage, and interest. Total appropriations is $256.1 million, excluding transfers. And broken down by fund type, this includes the largest category of $177.5 million in general fund, $23.7 million in our project funds, $21.4 million in internal service funds, $19.6 in special revenue funds, and $13.8 in debt service funds. The total appropriations by type include the largest portions of the budget going towards personnel cost at 58%, 22% for supplies and services, 7% for intra-district, 5% for interagency and debt service, and 3% for capital outlay. So in a broad overview, we have 256.1 million in appropriations, 34.2 million in transfers out, 22 million in the use of fund balance, for total uses of 268.3 million. And then Deb will talk about some specific allocations.
All right, so next we'll be talking about staffing. So this year, for the first time, we've crossed that 900 FTE threshold. So our authorized FTE 925.38. We are adding 36.8 new additional base budget FTEs. And I'll break these down for you in different ways on the next slides, but 5.59 of those are pipeline positions. That's for new parklands and facilities that are being opened this year. And we have 9 positions that are being upgraded from 0.75 FTE to 1.0 FTE to full-time status. That's something that we've been working on for several years to move our 9-monthers to full-time positions. Here's a breakdown of staffing changes by type. So you can see that 80% of the positions that are being added this year are represented by Local 2428 AFSCME. 8% of the positions being added are Police Association represented positions, and 12% are manager or confidential positions. And here's another breakdown by division. So operations division is getting the lion's share, 22.8 FTE, followed by public safety with 8 new members. And then our acquisition, stewardship, and design department will be receiving 2.5 FTE. Legal department will receive 2 new positions at legal and risk department. Human resources, 1.5 FTE, and finance and management services, 1 new staff person. And here is a history of new positions budgeted going back to 2011. And you can see, if you look at the 2021 FTEs added, that we, again, as Deborah mentioned earlier, we were really quite conservative in last year's budget. This year, it seems like a big spike, but if you sort of imagine that we take that chunk of the tall tower and we put it in 2021, that it really is sort of a gradual slope of us increasing our the FTEs that we add every year. It's really just sort of a gradual slope going up each year. And that has to do with us being funded by property taxes, which is generally a stable, steady, increasing source of revenue, generally. All right. Before we begin to move on to the project and programs budget, I'm going to turn it back over to Deborah.
Thank you. Thank you, Deb. Great overview. I just wanted to highlight a few things. In the proposed budget, we do list out all the details of those increases. So if you want any of additional detail, you can see that in the document. And also just relating to staffing. So a couple of things that we've done differently this year is that we are drawing down on our pension trust for the first time as planned. We set up a 10-year pension trust for our miscellaneous employees, and we're going to draw down on that for $2 million. And then we also implemented what we call a vacancy or attrition rate this year. And so those are some of the new things that we've put into the budget. So we can just be a little bit more accurate, a little bit more best practice of how other agencies do their budgets, and to also not have as much savings at the end of the year. So those are some of our goals. Thanks. Now we'll go on to the projects.
All right, so moving on to this is the second volume of our budget, the projects and programs budget. Tao Wong Se Pan is our admin analyst who worked on putting this together. So kudos to her. The project budget is broken into 2 sections. At the front, we have all of our projects. So those are generally larger budgets where we're going to end up with an asset at a specific location. So this year we have 95 projects that are getting that full page treatment where they get a photo, they get the project status, funding status, expected operating impacts if there are any, a list of the different funding sources and expenditures to date. And then the vast majority, over 300 of our projects, get grouped together as programs. So they're listed according to a certain type. So groupings of services, programs, or areas of resource management that reflect a broad commitment to specific areas of work. So you have 10 programs where we've got 300 projects listed, not as much detail, but you can kind of get a better sense of how the district prioritizes these areas. This is a different way of breaking down our project and program funds, talking about the type of work that's being done. And you can see 30% of funding in our projects and programs area is for public access type projects. So those are things like trails, staging areas, and park improvements. Another 30% for infrastructure projects. Those are things like utilities and facility projects. The next largest area of funding is land acquisition. So that can be purchasing real property, and it can also be safety and security projects where we're securing the land that we've already acquired and making it safe for future use. 16% of project and program funds is for resource enhancement projects. So that can be things like wetland or creek restorations and habitat improvement projects. And then we have a small sliver of funding that's for technology and equipment. So 4% of project funding is for that. And here's a bit of a summary of the breakdown between project appropriations versus those program appropriations. So up at the top, we have our program appropriations, and I won't go into all of them, but you may notice land use planning and design has the 5.1 million, the largest appropriation there. And that is because a lot of our staff who work on projects are actually funded through those projects. So that's where you see the staffing costs for those FTE in that program area. Next largest area to identify is infrastructure maintenance. So we put a lot of funding into maintaining the assets that we already have. And then lastly, I'll point out the services enhanced through special funding. That is mostly is our Measure FF funding source. So that's money that across the two districts, people have said that they're going to put additional money for these enhanced services. And then down at the bottom, we have a listing of different project appropriations. It's not comprehensive, it's just some of them. And then I'm going to highlight a few of these even more on the following pages. So here's the Bay Water Trail Site Pier Maintenance Project at Carquinez Strait. And if you happen to have a book, it's on page E28. So this is a $500,000 appropriation to install the Bay Water Trail site at the Eckley Pier, which will include ADA parking, path of travel, a new drinking fountain, and accessible ramp, and then safety improvements for the railway crossing and improvements to the restroom. Next project we're highlighting here is the Borel Develop Agricultural Park project. So this is $100,000 for land use planning. So this park is not yet open to the public, but the land use planning will begin us being able to do that. So working on planning to provide visitor parking, restrooms, interpretive programs, landscaping, and orchard restoration. Out at Pleasanton Ridge Regional Park, we'll be constructing 3 natural surface trails. So the Mariposa Trail, Tejon Falls Trail, and Philip Schultz Trail will be getting underway this year. And here's a very significant project out at Point Pinole to develop a service yard. So we're appropriating $700,000 this year. And I believe the total cost is expected to be over $4 million to develop this new service yard. It'll include park offices, a garage, and fenced service yard, among other things. All right, that wraps up the presentation on the 2 books. So as a reminder, the next steps are December 7th. This will go to the Board of Directors for the first public hearing. December 21st, it'll go back to the Board of Directors again for the second public hearing and budget adoption. And we are asking that the Finance Committee recommend to the Board of Directors adoption of the 2022 proposed operating project and program budget. Be happy to take any questions at this time.
Thank you very much, Deborah. Is there anything else you want to add?
I'm good with, I'll just add as I answer questions.
Okay, so thank you for the presentation and for the 2 volumes that we had a chance to read over Thanksgiving. And thank you, Christina. This is, I think, your second budget.
Yes.
So.
Yeah.
Yeah. So all was not new this year for you, with a few others. All right, so let me turn to our directors. I'm here in person, and our other 2 members are coming to us remotely. So are there some questions or comments on the this budget presentation that either of you would like to bring up? Need to see you say yes or no.
Sure.
Okay, Elizabeth, you had some comments.
Yes. Well, first of all, thank you very much for the report and also all of the hard work on the budget. I know this has been going on for months, and I really strongly support the final product. So thank you for your work on that. And I particularly appreciate a couple of things. One of them, as I've said in the past, I'm very glad that we have changed the policy on the vacancy attrition rate, and that we're sort of projecting forward in terms of what conservatively we believe our vacancy rate will be based on historical evidence, and that we're able to use those funds and plan how to use those funds in this budget process. I think that's very important for our goals and also for transparency purposes. So appreciate that. And I'm also glad to see the increase in new FTEs. I know our staff is working incredibly hard out there particularly with the increased numbers of people in the pandemic, which I think most of those crowds will continue. And so it's good to see that they're getting some support, and that our public safety folks and others are also getting additional support, because of course the fire issues and other safety issues are also incredibly important. So I just really, those were the only real comments I wanted to make. And I thank everybody for your work on this.
Okay, thank you, Elizabeth. Ellen?
Thank you. Sorry, having a problem with my unmute for a moment there. I, of course, agree with what was just said by Director Eccles. Thank you for these presentations at the meeting today, and the written documents as well. Thanks to all of the staff that was always involved in this very intense amount of work. And thank you, Deborah, for also your leadership with all of the staff. It's quite impressive, especially knowing what people have had to deal with over the last year or so, and how COVID had its impacts on what we do. I was very impressed about the information provided to us to determine the resources, what type of fees, income, other opportunities for funding to take care of all the needs in the district, and provide that funding to make our budget successful. So very impressive to see that work, and the improvements that have been made over this last year, especially knowing needs that we have. And then the other comment I would just like to make, and I'll probably have an opportunity to look at the documentation even more thoroughly before we discuss this at the board meeting. I'm just curious if there would be a way for us to make more of a statement about what is needed in our older parks. Now, obviously, I know that the leaders in the district areas of our various different parks have these discussions and talk about their needs. But I think it would be, at least for me, it would be helpful to know a little more about what the needs are in some of our older parks. There may be more older parks in some districts than others, but just to have some information as to, what those needs are, to do improvements that are needed. Obviously we have some very good information about what we're doing in our new parklands and how we will, proceed in positive ways with the resources we need for those. But it would be helpful to me to know more about how we address the needs in some of the older parklands that, are obviously needed. And people do discuss them, but to have more of some sort of statement that goes across regions for the whole park district where those needs exist. So thank you very much. Very impressed by the presentation today and all the hard work that is done.
Ellen, can you say a little bit more about your request with regard to a larger statement on older parks? Are you talking about physical, just in general, physical aging that needs to be addressed? Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, I think it would be good for us to have some sort of written knowledge that compares what's needed across the district and the various parks that are older. I have some older spots that need some updates in my district. So of course, I pay attention to that. But to be able to compare some of the work that is done to show what's needed in parks that need upgrades, improvement of facilities, and sort of see that across the entire district. I did ask earlier a question about how that work is done, and it's typically done in each region, of course, to talk about what improvements they need. But it'd be nice to see how that's compared across the district. There may be a document like that already, but it's something I'd like to see. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and Deborah has at least initial response for you.
Thank you for your comments, Director Corbett. As you know, the district has, over the last 6 or 7 years, embarked on an asset management inventory, and we just really have completed assessing the structures throughout all of our parks. And kind of annually, we report out at a very high level to the board on where we are with our facility condition indexes, but it doesn't really provide the details that I think you're asking for. So we are now able to look at that data and plan our work in a way that we can first and foremost try to protect our current structures. So we have been working on roofs, electrical, also structural things like bridges have been a high priority for us. And you can see in this budget, there are a lot of major maintenance projects that are brought forward. That's another small change that we have in the way we're doing our budget is we're going to, over time, add more capital projects to this operating annual budget cycle. So we did that in the area of maintenance. But I hear you speaking about getting maybe a more detailed report on the older parks and whether or not our current facilities, what the status of that is. But then I also hear you saying, what are future plans for our older parks? What are some of the newer things? So we can certainly work on the where are we currently and find a good time to report that to the board. We have that information that we can put together.
Okay, I think that's very helpful, and it has been enlightening to go through looking looking at each park, because we've been doing that, what, in thirds or fourths or
We
thirds.
did it in about over a 5-year
Yeah.
period.
Yeah, okay, thank you for that. I think that'll be really helpful, and I think interesting to all the board. Okay, so I put together some of my questions, larger and smaller, that I sent off in such a timely way last night. And so I want to bring up just a few of them today and see what kind of answers we can provide now. And I know as it goes to the board, there'll be more. And I'm glad our general manager is here, because one of my questions has to do with her approach to the budget and some of the different concepts that you've tried to put into this budget. Could you comment on that some?
Yeah, thank you, Director Lane. Deborah and Deb alluded to a couple of them, but just to highlight them for the room. One is really looking at trying to minimize our mid-year revisions that historically we've done here, and try to incorporate as much as we can into this annual process. You will still have, like every other public agency, some adjustments that you would want to look at throughout the year. But the hope is that we really, if there are things that we know we're going to have savings in, to try to incorporate this into the annual process. So one of those is a large item, and that's employing the vacancy factor, vacancy rate, which is a best practice of public agencies. You never have 100% of your positions filled 100% of the time. And so you will have, like every other agency, some savings that just is factored into your year. And so just accounting for that as part of your annual process is really a best practice. And so we are putting in a 4% vacancy factor in this proposed budget, which is a fairly conservative number, but it's one that we want to start with. And I wouldn't recommend that we go any higher than that, even though we have looked at our historical vacancies and they actually have been higher than that. But with our recruitment practices, and we're trying to fill as many vacancies as we can, I really wouldn't recommend going any higher than 4%. But that does allow some room for us to actually add new positions. So that's really a best practice. Another one is also looking at the revenue projections, and on our property tax revenues, we have a very good sense of where we're going to finish the current year. And so really trying to factor in the growth projections that we get from both the county and our consultant, and to factor that into this proposed budget so that you have additional revenues to also appropriate. Again, these are known items that typically we have just used as part of our mid-year adjustments, and just trying to incorporate them into the annual process here. Again, best practice, it's much more transparent, and again, allows us to add those 38 new FTEs, which we desperately need.
Thank you for that. So I went buzzing through the budget, and one of the questions I had, which I should know, had to do with our Western Hills open space, planning to open in 22. And I think I need to know if that's the McCosker property, or if it's McCosker Plus, or what area it really covers in Sibley.
Thank you, Director Lane. Christina Kelchner, AGM of Acquisition Stewardship and Development. The Western Hills open space is 389 acres and does not include McCosker. So the McCosker property is already owned by the Park District. That's the area where the creek restoration project is currently going on. And the Western Hills open space is an additional 389 acres that will be coming to the Park District.
Okay, so, but we are planning on both the Western Hills and the McCosker property being open next year?
Yes, I believe 2022, we do hope the construction will be complete. I'm looking at our Chief of Design and Construction, she's confirming. So for the McCosker Creek Restoration and Public Access Project, we do expect that to be completed in 2022. And I believe the Western Hills Open Space will also be completed in 2022. That's currently the plan.
Okay, thank you very much. And I guess the other thing I know, having talked to some staff, that the description of McCosker has been one that's been consistently used. But you know, some of the things that happened physically with that property were a result of not the best practices, shall we say. And so I am hoping that we'll keep think about how we're using the name from now on. You know, once it's open, we have other names to use that relate to the creek. And of course, the access is going to have the East Portal name.
Absolutely, Director Lane. Yes, it's often, as you know, a park district practice to refer to properties based on their former owners prior to acquisition from the park district. So as the project nears completion, we will have to retrain ourselves to start to use those new names that reflect the current condition of the property. Thank you for the reminder.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Okay, and so then my other one is, and somehow this did come up a couple of times, is has to do in performance measures. One is the Vasco Cave Service Center, and I think inside the budget we have this, it's scheduled for completion at 2 different dates. One is 22 and one is 23. And so I'd like to see that cleaned up. And I'd actually, on behalf of staff, urge you to have the date be 22 as opposed to 23. The fire that we had was in 2020, and it doesn't seem unreasonable that we ought to be able to put staff into the new center 2 years after the fire.
Thank you, Director Lane. We certainly agree. We are hoping that construction can begin in 2022. The project has been delayed because of the insurance, because this was a fire. So we had to wait for the insurance company to approve our plans and our choice of contractors. And so that has caused the project to take longer than we had hoped because of that delay with the insurance company. However, we do have the approvals that we need now. And so we are certainly going to get that done as quickly as we can because we know how important that is for staff.
Yeah, okay, I really appreciate it. And I know staff definitely would appreciate it. Okay, and then I had a question about the 5 miles of Bay Trail in Garm. That is the section that goes down into Niles Canyon, right?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay, so I'm really glad to see that begin to be built. All right, and then I had some suggestions that people can just handle. And I did want to thank staff for the very complete notes that talked about total resources and total uses. You go reading through those charts and you say, well, what about this and why that and how come? And so having the notes be as complete as they are is really helpful to a reader. And so I just wanted to thank you for doing that. And then in divisions, when we were talking about what we were going to, goals for 22, I wondered if updating the board operation guidelines should be listed And right now it's not, I don't think.
That certainly has been relayed to me as a goal of the board, is to bring that forward. So we can add that in there. I
Okay,
think it's a good suggestion.
yeah, because I looked for it and I didn't see it there. And let's see. For legal, I really appreciated having more detail in it and the highlights. Is that you around the corner? I always like people to take credit for things they're doing. And if it shows up in the budget, then you can go to one page all the time and see it. And then I had just a general comment on under operations that had to do with interpretation and recreation. So there are a couple of places where, well, under INR, they talk about serving special populations. And I think that's a good general term. But I want to add what I want to know if seniors might be a special population. You know, what happened at our board meeting last time was we had a really interesting chart produced by the people who are helping us with redistricting. And when you look at the percentage of our population that is seniors, there were several of our wards that had over 30%, over 60, which is no longer the old age that it used to be, I will say, but I just want to know that there are conversations more broadly put together about how we can serve those seniors. And maybe you want to say something about that, Jim?
Sure. Good afternoon, Chair Lane and members of the committee. Jim O'Connor, I'm your Assistant General Manager of Operations. As you know, for many years now, at least in my tenure here at the district, the board has asked us to provide specific programs around seniors. And so that, in my mind, is absolutely a special population that we provide specific programming for. So we can find a way to provide some more information, if you'd like, on what we're doing in that area.
I think that would be helpful, and I know we've experimented with different special programs, like getting seniors up to Pleasanton Bridge on vans and having them be able to hike high up, where you might take a long time to get up there, and that was a very appealing idea, but we didn't draw huge numbers, and so it was really more experimental than others. And so, I'd like to challenge staff to think in terms of more than programs, specific programs, but perhaps communicating what our current facilities offer. And one thing would be the short trails. Can't remember the name.
Right?
Yeah. So it doesn't necessarily need a naturalist or a docent to lead a program, but to reach out to areas where there are older people and say, here is something that you could find that's currently there that you could take advantage of, always going with a friend. And so I just wanted to raise that up a little bit.
I think that also would be a great idea for us to work with public affairs, on the website. We're recently doing a website upgrade, and there might be an opportunity to provide some specific information for that population on the website. It'd be a great idea.
Yeah, and I think it would be greatly appreciated too. So Hi, Carol.
Hi, Director Lane. Carol Johnson, Assistant General Manager of Public Affairs and the Executive Director of the Regional Parks Foundation. I would like to say that some of what you've asked about is happening through the community relations outreach that Mona Coe, our Manager of Community Relations, is doing through a variety of ways. Wellness walks. She's meeting with a variety of elders in a variety of diverse communities. And it is something that the foundation is very interested in funding as well. So we will certainly work collaboratively with the INR department, but there's some of the other ways that we're reaching out to seniors and communicating and getting them outdoors through public affairs, traditional outreach opportunities. So we definitely hear you. And in fact, I have a meeting after this with a large funder that is interested in doing more with us and financially paying for more outreach to seniors specifically.
Okay, I think that would be very helpful. I'm seeing more and more people who are who've been very active. You know, they've really been out there. They're with hiking clubs and they're used to hiking long distances, and then all of a sudden, you know, they're not able to do that much, but they only think in terms of that huge challenge instead of what they can happily experience in a regional park in perhaps another way. And so I really appreciate your spending some time on that. Thank you both. And then on projects, you know, I really like being on Finance Committee. I can just bring these things up earlier than the first board meeting. I was looking at Black Diamond and wondering about how we're looking at the back timber project. We spent a lot of money on that long stairway, which should enable a lot of able bodies to do a real in-depth hike into one part of the mines and then come out another part. I mean, it's just really a great new facility. But now we're looking at the back timbers, and it's a major potential collapse. And it's a lot of money. And so I'm wondering if that needs to be brought up as a priority, because that's such a unique tour for us in Black Diamond, and I think it needs some attention.
We have, Director Lane, we have had several internal meetings on that. And I know it is on the design and construction list of things to do. I can check on the priority. And you are correct, we are going to need additional funding than what is put aside.
Yeah, and a
So
lot of money.
We can look to the to getting some better estimates and bringing that forward at a future date.
Okay, well, I just wanted to put a gold star on it. Hello, Mr. O'Connor.
Hey, Jim O'Connor again. Just a quick couple of words on that topic, Director Lane, is that we have worked between operations and the design and construction staff. We have done some preliminary evaluation work to kind of outline what may have to actually be done there at back timber. So it's not been completely ignored. We actually are doing some work to evaluate the situation and to it'll serve us some baseline information for a future design process. But that project at this point remains unfunded, but we do need to address that fairly soon.
Okay, thank you. Then, I sent this list off to everybody. And let me drift down. One of my concerns while I was talking about the Del Valle kiosk, and hoping that any kind of interactive elements of that are really simple. Because one of the things that I hate worst of all is going to some kiosk and having it not work. And, and not because some battery wasn't put in, but because the conception was a little too sophisticated for the outdoor setting. Hi.
Again, Carol Johnson, AGM of Public Affairs, and my department or my division oversees the exhibit design group. And my team has been very conscientious about working with a designer who will provide interactive opportunities, but as you said, not too complex, and certainly not something that will be regularly breaking down. That is our commitment, to make sure that we have these new kiosk-oriented places that are located at the actual visitor center site for people to understand and get a chance to interact with the rest of what the park district offers. So it's going to be simplified.
Okay. Thank you.
And just for clarification for some of you out there in Zoom, we're talking about an interpretive exhibit that's standalone outside the visitor center, which provides an opportunity for interpretation when the visitor center is not open to the public. So I just want to clarify that for folks that may be listening out there in Zoom, the Zoom audience.
Okay, thank you. And while you're there, do you want to, Jim? My usual question, which is about the ADA access to Lake Anza.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, I don't have I'll get you an update on that project, but I know it was in play and I just don't know where it's at the moment, but I will get you an update on that, Director.
Okay, thank you.
You bet.
And then I'm wondering, when I looked at the at E90 Thurgood Marshall Park, good to have it there as a priority, but I'm just wondering if we are really going to have as a goal an opening of Bailey Road in 2023, if we have enough money in there. We've got $100,000, and that seems a little skimpy to me, to tell you the truth.
Christina Kelchner, AGM of Acquisition, Stewardship and Development, and you are absolutely correct, Director Lane. We will need additional funds. The $100,000 is to start on the planning and pre-design work, but we will be back to the board to ask for additional funding in order to be able to do the work to get that open.
And so when we are looking at the project description in our volume 2, which is one of my favorite volumes, all those pictures and all that information, you're saying that the funding for this is not included because
we don't know enough yet to have a cost estimate. So the initial $100,000 is to do studies, pre-design work, and out of that will come a cost estimate that then we will come back to the board with a funding plan for that.
And just for the public, this is just a section of the park. This is just developing public access south of Bailey Road. So it is something that we have a goal to get very close to completion by the end of 2023. But yeah, it's not the whole park.
That is absolutely correct.
Oh, yes. Thank you for that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, it's just the 900 acres south of Bailey Road. That's correct.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Thank you. And then I think the other ones people can get back to me on, unless there's one that you have available.
Well, Director Lane, we are preparing some written comments, but maybe Christina has a few more answers. I know you're always, yeah, go ahead and see if you have a few answers.
Sure. I actually wanted to ask our Director of Design and Construction, Lisa Gorgon, to come up and address you had questions about costs of restrooms at Briones and I believe Garm as well. So that's one that Lisa Gorgon can come up and give you an answer on.
Okay, thank you. I mean, the answer just may be that's how much these restrooms cost, but oh my gosh, they are certainly pricey.
Yes, good morning or good afternoon, Lisa Gorgon, Chief of Design and Construction. And we found that generally for flush restrooms, we can anticipate about 200,000 to 250,000 per stall. So that's sort of how, so you sort of know if it's 400,000 or 500,000, it's 2 stall. And then the numbers, the bigger the restroom, that's kind of how we estimate it. So, you know, that's it is expensive, but it also, you know, it's a sewer hookup. There's utilities that are included with that. And then there's the structure itself. So that's kind of, we like to use those round numbers sort of comprehensively for, you know, that's generally per stall. That's what we're looking at. So thank you.
Okay, well, thank you for that. And I know the visitors of things they appreciate. These new restrooms are definitely high on their list. So
Thank you.
Director Lane, you asked a question about the Garm's staging area as well, so we could just address that briefly. We do need funding for that, and we would come back to the board with a funding plan when we're ready. We have identified WW money that will nearly fund the development of the Garm's staging area. We do have some additional design work. We've discovered some cultural resources that we need to avoid. So we're working on some redesign for the location of the trail and the staging area at Garm's. I don't know, Lisa, if you have anything to add about tentative timing for that?
Yes, again, Lisa Gorgon, Chief of Design and Construction. So with Garm's, it is part of Pleasanton Ridge. And so we have the same project manager working on Tyler that's under construction right now. And so when Tyler is completed next year, we'll revisit, we'll pick back up Garm's just for consistency, keep it's Toby Perry, project manager. And so we had in parallel be looking at permitting of both Garm's and Tyler. And because of the reasons Christina mentioned, just with some resources that we discovered, we stopped advancing the permitting on Garm's so we could keep moving ahead with Tyler. So we'll refocus on Garm's probably at the end of next year. And we'll also want to re-engage with the city of Pleasanton. As you mentioned, they're very interested in this project. We know that the Pleasanton Ridge Land Use Plan was adopted in 2012. We really haven't been back to the city of Pleasanton, I think, since 2018. And so we'll want to revisit, you know, our plans with them as well. And you know, as we continue to engage, we get good input, and then sometimes that affects the schedule.
Okay, all right. I just wanted to remind you that Pleasanton seems to be watching this more than, of course, Tyler, which is in Sunol. And so thank you for that explanation. Okay, I think I'm not going to spend any more time on these for you, and I know you'll get back to me on those. And so what we do is we have our 2022 budget for the committee requesting a recommendation to send to the board. And do I hear a motion to do that?
So moved.
And second.
Okay, we have a motion by Eccles and a second by Corbett. All in favor, say aye.
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 So we'd like to pass this on to the board with a recommendation of a unanimous recommendation from the Finance Committee.
Thank you, Director Lane.
Thank you, Director Lane. And just for the record, I'm going to take down the individual votes as well. Director Eccles?
Aye.
Thank you. Director Corbett?
Aye.
Thank you. And finally, Director Ling.
Aye.
Thank you so much.
Sorry, I forgot about that, Kayla. Okay.
You did great. And I just wanted to confirm that we do not have any additional public comments that would like to be made before we move on from this item.
All right, thank you. All right, our second item is the GAN limit for 2022. Perhaps we could do this quickly.
Hi again, Christina Crosby, Budget Manager. Let me make sure I've got the presentation here. Okay, there we go. Okay, I am presenting agenda item number 2, the 2022 GAN appropriation limit. There we go. Annually, as required by the California Constitution, public agencies must recognize and adopt appropriation limits as established by Article 13B, otherwise known as the GAN appropriation limit. The appropriation limit was originated in 1978, 79, and is adjusted annually based on the population change factor in each county, as well as a cost of living factor, which is received via letter from California Department of Finance annually. In 2021, the GAN appropriation limit for the Park District was $448,709,443. Considering the 2022 adjustments for cost of living and population in both Alameda and Contra Costa counties, the appropriation limit is calculated to be $474,334,925 for the 2022 proposed budget. With total appropriation subject to the limit at $171,874,364, the district is well under the GAN limit by more than $300 million. The action requested of you today is that the Board of Finance Committee recommends staff include this information in the adoption of the 2022 proposed budget, which will be submitted to the Board of Directors for approval in December. This concludes my brief presentation.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions or comments from the committee?
I don't have any questions. It was a very thorough presentation, very understandable, and I'm happy to go ahead and make the motion for this as long as Elizabeth is ready to.
All right, we have a motion to recommend this item
And I'll second it.
and a second. Caitlin, could you take a roll call, please?
I'm happy to. Why don't we start with Director Corbett?
Aye.
Thank you. Director Eccles?
Aye.
Thank you. And finally, Chair Lane?
Aye.
Thank you.
Passes unanimously, and we are going to recommend this to the board. Our third item for the agenda is our September 30th, 2021 investment report and portfolio review.
All right, good afternoon, Deborah Spalding. And that is the wrong presentation. 1 second here. Here we go. So I am going to do a brief presentation for you, and then I'm going to turn the presentation over to our staff from, why is this not moving forward? We have our consultants here from PFM who will be providing some more information about the third quarter investments. So just to give you a high level overview, in the third quarter, we were drawing down on our cash because we received very little revenue. In the third quarter, we get our main property tax revenues in April and December. So third quarter is a big expenditure quarter for the Park District, but very little revenue is coming in. So you can see if you compare the market value as of June 30th to September 30th of the CAMP line, the California Asset Management Program. That's mainly where we're drawing down on those funds. Looking at our longer term investments for short and midterm securities, you can see if you compare back to the second quarter, June 30th, 2021, that we've slightly increased our longer term investments, primarily in treasuries and supranationals, and we've reduced exposure to certificates of deposit. Now looking at district funds held in trust, so you can see our pension trust fund is continuing to grow incrementally. We've put in $250,000 per quarter, and it's also gaining in value due to the investing that's being done there. If you look further down on this page, you can see that we're drawing down on our Measure WW project funds. And again, that's why we will be issuing new bond funds in early 2022, which we'll hear about in another presentation. And then lastly, looking at the debt service funds, you can see that we've made our latest debt service payments in September and October. So there's those funds have diminished since the second quarter. So we will want a recommendation from the Finance Committee to bring this to the full board. But before we do that, we'll have a full presentation from PFM. And then also, in addition to the normal third quarter review, they're going to be talking about changing the portfolio benchmark to a longer duration, which is something that we discussed at our last two Finance Committee meetings ago when we heard the second quarter report. So I'm going to turn it over to Allison County, who's here from PFM.
Hi. Thank you, Deb, and good morning, everybody. I'm here today with my colleague Monique Spike, and we will update you on the district report. And I'll just share my screen here. Okay, can you all see the report up there? Yeah, no?
No.
Okay. All right, there we go. How about now?
It's coming up now. There you go.
Okay, great. All right, so as always, I'll just start with a brief economic update, again, to provide context about what was happening in the market with interest rates before we get into the portfolio. You're probably not surprised to hear that COVID-19 really has and continues to impact the economy among many different factors. And here, just kind of talking about two of them. So on the left-hand side, showing you daily cases both in the US and globally. And then on the right-hand side, showing two different economic indicators. So over the last quarter, the quarter ended September 30th, as we saw cases start to pick up, really driven by the Delta variant. We saw a drop down in some economic activity, including consumer sentiment, as shown in the upper right-hand chart. If you kind of focus on the right-hand side, you see that drop down in the middle of 2021. And then looking at the bottom chart, our TSA checkpoint travel numbers, so people moving through the airport. So we also saw travel dip down, travel via airplane move down during the late summer, fall, as those COVID cases picked up. As cases started to drop, we again saw a little bit of a turnaround. You can see that also a little bit on the charts as you saw confidence pick up a little bit. And of course, travel really picked up, not necessarily because of the COVID situation, but with the holiday as well here moving into Thanksgiving. But all in all, really, COVID-19 continues to impact the economy and puts a lot of uncertainty in the future of the economy. And so we'll continue to see this as we turn to the next page. I'm talking about overall growth as shown by GDP. So growth in the US economy has been very strong. The left-hand side shows you actual GDP for the fourth quarter of 2020 and the first two quarters of 2021. And with growth over 6%, that's very strong growth for the US. You might recall pre-pandemic quarterly annualized GDP was around 2.5%. So very strong start to 2021. Since this chart was put together, we did receive third quarter GDP, and that showed a bit of a slowdown as just 2% annualized growth. And that's relative. You can see the economist expectation of 4.5%. Again, that slowdown of 2% growth, again, on par with what we saw pre-pandemic, but a slowdown from earlier this year. Again, was really driven by that increase in cases, driven by the Delta variant. The remainder of the information on this chart shows economist expectations for GDP throughout the course of 2021 into 2022. And you can see economists do expect growth to continue to slow down, but getting back to that pre-pandemic level of around 2.5% growth. The next page talks about the employment sector. The employment sector has seen a very, very strong recovery from that peak unemployment back in April of 2020. The data here goes through August, and we saw unemployment down to 5.2%. However, during August and into September, we started to see a slowdown in job growth, which was a bit concerning. The chart on the right-hand side, you can see 235,000 jobs added in August. We had even fewer jobs added in September. So again, starting to get concerned. However, the October jobs report was quite strong. Over 500,000 jobs were added in October. Prior months were revised higher, and the unemployment rate moved down to 4.6%. So that was great news to see in October. There is still weakness in the employment sector. About 5 million fewer workers now than there were pre-pandemic. Due to different reasons, some people retired, some people retired a little early, but definitely COVID still impacts that, as some people are hesitant to join the workforce due to health concerns, while others are still have child care or elder care responsibilities due to the pandemic. So still seeing some weakness in the employment sector. Next, we'll talk about inflation. If you have a car that takes gasoline, or if you buy food at the grocery store, I probably don't have to tell you that prices are quite a bit higher than they were a year ago. So this chart here, this page here shows CPI on the left-hand side, Consumer Price Index, a very common reading of inflation. I'm going through August, showing 5.3%, so year-over-year change in prices. The latest data for October was actually 6.2%, so even up higher than we were in August. Then the chart on the right-hand side breaks out the various components of CPI. And so even though this was from, as I mentioned, August, the October kind of readings are very similar. We're seeing much of the price increases in the used car and truck industry, kind of due to a supply-demand issue there, but also energy reflected again in those gasoline prices, as well as to heat our homes. And so as winter approaches, we are going to see higher energy bills. But even if you look at on the right-hand side of the chart, some of the areas that haven't seen quite a big increase in prices year over year, apparel, food, shelter. So while they're not as extreme as that overall 6%, increase in prices, they are still elevated, around 4% increase from a year ago, well above where we've been historically and well above the Fed's 2% target. There are differing opinions among economists and Fed officials on if this inflation is transitory, is the term the Fed uses, or temporary, or if it's here to stay, assuming the Fed doesn't step in. The Fed chair has been the most vocal about it being temporary. That said, I think it's lasted much longer than even he expected when we first saw inflation pick up in late spring. And I think all can agree it will likely stick around through 2022, even if it is temporary. And so we'll definitely see this inflation, this higher inflation, be talked about a lot during various Fed meetings and continue to impact Fed policy. Then lastly, in the market update, looking at interest rates. So here we're showing the U.S. Treasury yield curve. We do show you from 3 months out to 30 years. The majority of the district funds are invested in that 5 years and under range. And we're showing you what interest rates were on June 30th in the dotted blue line and September 30th in the solid blue line, so quarter over quarter. And so kind of focusing on that left-hand side where we invest most of the district funds, you can see interest rates on that very short end, under 2 years, didn't really move at all. Those interest rates are really anchored by the Fed funds target rate, which remains at close to 0%. Although we did see a little bit of an increase in maturities beyond 2 years, from 2 to 5 years, really 2 to about 10 years. Interest rates did tick up a little bit. And so while they didn't move a lot quarter over quarter, we will see those higher interest rates reflected in the return on the portfolio. And then just finally on this chart, we're also showing you the year-to-date range. So that beige shaded area represents where interest rates have been since in 2021 so far. And so you can see on that shorter end, that 5-year and under, ending the quarter, interest rates were at the higher end of their recent range. And since quarter end, we have seen interest rates continue to trend higher in those 10 years and under maturities. So I'll move into the portfolio now. You may notice that the charts and the pages look a little bit different than last quarter. This is a first quarter of the new format of our reports. We contain a lot of the same information, some new information, and kind of shown in some different ways that we hope will not only be appealing, but also really provide you the information you need to really understand the portfolio. So here's just an overall snapshot of the portfolio. I'm here just looking at the PFM managed funds in the portfolio. So none of the liquid accounts, none of the funds in LAIF or CAMP. So just under $143 million invested. The portfolio has an effective duration of 1.8 years. You can see that matches the benchmark duration. And if you look down in the bottom right-hand corner, you can see that duration distribution. So the benchmark is the 1 to 3 year U.S. Treasury index. So all of the benchmark funds are in that 1 to 3 year area, while the portfolio is a bit more diversified in those duration buckets. You will see, just to point out, you see there's no securities with durations beyond 4 years. However, you do have some maturities beyond 4 years, even beyond 5 years, but the average duration of those securities have shorter are shorter than the maturity, and so they fall in those shorter maturity and those shorter duration buckets. So we do have some slightly longer duration securities. Yeah. Sorry.
Can you briefly just describe the difference between duration and maturity?
Yeah, thank you. So a maturity just simply looked at, days or years to maturity, the maturity date relative to the date we are at today or on 9/30. However, duration factors in other things such as interest payments. So each year you receive some of your funds back on the security. So a duration will always be slightly shorter than the maturity. But in some securities, the duration is a lot shorter than the maturity, and that's particularly true for mortgage-backed securities because they not only pay interest, they also pay principal. So those securities have fairly short durations relative to their maturities. And so while the maturities are longer than 5 years, because of the shorter duration, they still really fit the portfolio strategy. And they help balance out to, again, having the same duration of the benchmark at quarter end. The portfolio is very high credit quality. The average credit quality was AA. You can see in the chart on the bottom left-hand corner, most of the securities are rated AA or better. And then the upper right-hand corner shows you the sector allocation. So about 3/4 of the portfolio were in U.S. Treasuries or federal agencies, with the rest in high-quality corporate notes, as well as municipal obligations. The next page, we show the activity in the portfolio for the quarter, the trade activity. So the chart on the left-hand side shows you the different sectors along the y-axis and then the dollar value on the x-axis. And you can see that a majority of the activity, both the sales as well as the purchases, were in the U.S. Treasury sector, which has been the case for the past several quarters. There's limited value in other sectors right now, just as a result of different factors, including really a strong demand for high quality investments, which is what we hold in the district portfolio. The yield difference between treasuries and the other sectors are very minimal, so they're all yielding fairly similar yields. And in that environment, we favor U.S. Treasuries, very safe, but also very liquid. So when that relationship changes, we will be able to move out of Treasuries into some of the other sectors that offer higher yields and return potential. Next, I'll turn to the performance of the portfolio. This page does contain a bit more information than in the past, so I'll just go through it here for you. So the chart at the top shows you the portfolio's performance for the quarter, the 3 months, as well as historical periods in the blue bars. Your benchmark, again, as noted in the footnote, the 1 to 3 year Treasury index in beige. And then we're also showing you the portfolio's performance net of PFM fee in the green bars. And then moving down, this information here is new in the new report, and that's showing the dollar value return of your portfolio. So as a reminder, the total return takes into account your realized earnings as well as your unrealized gains or losses. So for the quarter, the past 3 months, you can see the portfolio had the interest earned plus your change in market value. So showing a negative change in market value as a result of those higher interest rates we talked about earlier, but resulting in a positive dollar return, which equates to that 0.08% total return for the quarter. And then we show your benchmark return of 0.06%, so a slight outperformance of the portfolio for the past quarter. And then historically, all that information over the past 1, 3, 5, and 10 years, you can see the portfolio continues to do quite well relative to your benchmark over the historical periods. And then the last page I'll just show you here is just looking now at your realized earnings, so taking out those unrealized gains or losses, showing the portfolio's realized earnings on an accrual basis, again, for the past quarter, and then historically, and just showing that growth there in the chart. So you can see, although interest rates are low, we are starting to see some unrealized losses in the portfolio. The portfolio does continue to earn good earnings for the district. So now we'll move into the ESG portion, and I'll turn it over to Monique.
Yeah, we only have 2 slides to share this quarter on ESG. Just a reminder, the district's portfolio is managed with an ESG mandate that stands for environmental, social, and governance. So we are really paying attention to the exposure in the portfolio. You can see here that about 49% of the district's portfolio is rated for ESG factors. On the next slide, we'll summarize essentially the portfolio's score over the quarter. The portfolio's investment policy asks that the issuers in the portfolio have an ESG risk rating below 30 on average. And should an issuer have an ESG risk rating above 30, we ask that they be a top performer in their industry. As you can see from this slide, the portfolio has maintained on average a good ESG score in the medium category, which is our objective. For the portfolio. The portfolio's risk rating is a 22.2, so well below that 30 target. The average risk rating, as you can see, if you pay attention to the top bar, decreased slightly over the quarter. That's an improvement. And a lot of that risk exposure, if you sort of break it down between how much exposure you have, you can see that your exposure decreased slightly, and the management of the exposure for the issuers in the portfolio was within range. So in general, fairly good ESG performance for the quarter. This is something we continue to monitor, and we'll plan to come back at another meeting with a more in-depth view of the ESG profile of the portfolio. That concludes our formal presentation on the performance of the portfolio, and we did have a benchmark discussion prepared. So if there are no questions on the portfolio, we can turn to the benchmark discussion.
All right, so let me ask of the committee if you have any questions on the presentation or comments.
Not at this time.
No, not at this time.
All right, then please go ahead with the benchmarks. I'm looking up to talk to her when, of course, she's on the screen.
Great. Well, as Allison mentioned when she discussed the portfolio, we manage the district's portfolio to a benchmark. And the benchmark serves as the official yardstick for how the portfolio is performing. We use it to gauge our performance on a total return basis, but we also use it as a mark of the amount of duration risk, that's interest rate risk we take on the portfolio, and the maturity structure of the portfolio. Allison, if you can go to full screen view, we'll start here. So it's important to mention again that the district's portfolio is managed according to a 1 to 3 year strategy. And the current benchmark for the district's portfolio is the ICE Bank of America 1 to 3 year US Treasury Index. And that index essentially comprises all US Treasuries with maturities between 1 and 3 years. So again, it gives us sort of a benchmark for the maturity structure of the portfolio, and it gives us an idea of how we're performing. Now, since we've been managing the portfolio to the benchmark, the portfolio has consistently outperformed that benchmark with less volatility. And what we mean by volatility is how many quarters have there been of negative return over the past reporting period. And in general, as you can see, we've had less quarters of negative return. So we are performing well against the district's benchmark. However, as you can see on the next page, the district's, on page 2, thank you, the district's portfolio balance has steadily grown. So this chart goes back to September of 2015. And as you can see, the amount of cash in the securities portfolio that managed by PFM has steadily increased. Now, what that suggests to PFM and in conversations with staff is that there does appear to be cash available perhaps for some longer term investments. Therefore, the district is considering moving to a longer duration benchmark strategy. So on the next slide, we just have some considerations. One, we're continuously working with district staff to talk about the benchmark and the strategy that we're implementing for the district's portfolio. And we want to ensure that it continues to meet the district's objectives of safety first, cash flow and liquidity second, and lastly, return. So as I mentioned, with the growth in portfolio assets, a lot of confidence in the liquidity position of the portfolio. Again, in addition to the securities portfolio, you do have plenty of cash assets. And the current rate environment, we are considering looking at extending the benchmark strategy. Now, the question, of course, is, well, what does that mean? And what are the implications of that? Well, from a return perspective, and currently in the low interest rate environment, the yield curve is very steep. In the blue line on this chart, we show the US Treasury curve with maturities from 3 months to 10 years. Now, currently, the district is generally limited to the 3-year area of the curve. However, by adding longer term investments, we can capture some additional income for the portfolio. And that's shown here by looking at the steepness, which we highlight in the taupe. Between 1 year and 5 years, the district is able to pick up an additional 1.05% in steepness. So you really are getting compensated for moving out longer. And even from 5 years to 10 years, there's some additional yield pickup, although it's not as steep as the 1 to 5 year area. So firstly, you have some additional income potential. Now, with that additional income potential, however, you do pick up some volatility. And we try to represent that on the next slide. Now, again, what do we mean by volatility? Well, in this case, we're representing volatility by quarters with negative return, which you can see on the far right. Now, this table shows 3 rows. The first row is the 1 to 3 year US Treasury Index. Now, that again is the district's performance benchmark. That is the yardstick we are using to gauge the performance of the district's portfolio. The duration, 1.9 years, is an interest rate risk metrics. It generally tells you how much your portfolio value will change with changes in interest rates. And as you can see to the far right, it had 9 out of 40 quarters over the past 10 years of negative return. Now, as the portfolio gets longer and you start including longer term securities, your duration increases, goes from 1.9 to 2.6, which is the next longer benchmark, the 1 to 5 year, and from 2.6 to 3.9, which is one of the longest benchmarks, the 1 to 10 year US Treasury index. And as you can see with each of those two indices, the quarters negative returns gets more. It just gets larger. So you have more volatility the longer out you go. Now you're compensated for that increased volatility with the amount of return you get. So you can see the third column, the annualized total return, the longer out you go, the more return the district would earn on average. So for example, the 1 to 3 year US Treasury index returned 1.16% each year on average for the past 10 years, whereas the 1 to 5 returned 1.45% each year on average for the past 10 years.
Hey, Monique, I'm just going to interrupt for a minute. This is really dense information, and I just want to make sure the committee understands that we've been listening to you and we've been hearing board members and committee members suggest, should we go longer term? Should we pick up a little bit of that income? And so that's what we're presenting to you of kind of a recommendation to go ahead and do that, to change our benchmark practice. So as she finishes up, just think that's why we're presenting this to you, to bring you that recommendation that we're interested in changing our benchmark. Go ahead, Monique.
Thank you. On the next slide, I try to show that volatility a different way. And, we show this as, on a quarterly basis. What does that look like? The district's current strategy is represented by the 1 to 3, which is blue. And you can see that over time, the returns go up and down with changes in the interest rate environment. In the yellow, it's the 1 to 5 year strategy. So very similar trend on the line, but you can see that there are higher peaks and lower valleys. And as you go to the 1 to 10 year, the peaks get even higher and the valleys get even lower. So that's just representative of the volatility. So while you are capturing higher returns, you are capturing lower returns in situations where the interest rate environment may be rising. So in summary, what we wanted to share with you is that, the district's cash flow pattern does support the ability to move funds longer. The district has had good performance with the 1 to 3. We've exceeded the benchmark returns, and that 1 to 3 year strategy does meet objectives. But again, if the district is considering moving to a 1 to 5 year strategy, the district can see higher returns and earnings over the long run. There will be some increased volatility. The maturity structure of the portfolio will change, and we wanted to show that maturity distribution in the chart on the bottom. So a couple of things to point out. The light blue line is the district's current liquidity position, which will not change with this strategy. The district has plenty of liquidity in overnight accounts and is expected to continue to maintain that sufficient liquidity. The current portfolio is represented by the dark blue. That's the current maturity structure. And we're talking about moving to a 1 to 5 year strategy. So that would mean moving to the bright yellow on this chart. And as you can see, the bright yellow, it essentially moves more funds out to that 3 to 5 year area. It would be about between 19% in the 3 to 4 year area and 20% in the 4 to 5 year area. We think that we can do that on a gradual basis and move the portfolio out. Again, the portfolio would continue to have that liquidity bucket in the overnight category, but it would allow for the portfolio to capture some higher returns without picking up too much additional volatility in the portfolio. Are there any questions on this discussion?
Yes. Should I go ahead?
Yes.
So first of all, thank you very much for the presentation, because I'm one of the people who've been asking about why are we so have so much in the shorter end when we could do better over time with a longer maturity and still, not that risky. Still a conservative approach. So thank you. This is very interesting. So my main question is when you're looking at the longer maturity, of course, we're going to have more volatility, but if you're going to have an outlook that is long enough to even out that volatility while still and capture those higher returns, like what is the downside in moving to a longer maturity?
So the downside in moving to the longest benchmark is the duration risk. And that is the risk that the portfolio value will decline with large swings in interest rates. The interest rate environment has been a little finicky lately. We are expected in the future to go into a rising rate environment. And in rising rate environments, longer duration strategies, longer term strategies are the most impacted with potentially negative returns in the future. Many of our clients who are at 1 to 3 year strategies slowly move out the duration curve, moving from a 1 to 3 to a 1 to 5, and perhaps longer if cash flows and strategy support that.
But Director Eccles, I think in the long run, it is a benefit because you're correct. When you look at the long term, you do have the opportunity for higher yield. It's sometimes that December 31st market value that might be hitting at a low point in the market that makes you feel a little uncomfortable. But when you're holding those investments past that date, I don't think there's much risk.
Right. Okay. Yeah, I mean, if you go back a few slides where she has the volatility and the amount that you actually gain, not that one, but I think one before, yeah, here.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, you have this volatility, but so my question, and you mostly answered it, is so what is the problem with the volatility if you're getting a higher return? And I guess, so are you saying that it's possible that volatility could even increase in a rising rate environment, or?
Well, that's a good question. I think the volatility is really represented by that 3.93 number. That gives you a sense of how sensitive the portfolio is to changes in interest rates. And the way you use that number is you turn it into a percentage. So 3.93 would turn into 3.93%. And you would multiply that by the market value of your portfolio. And if interest rates, for example, increase by 1%, you would expect the market value of the portfolio to decline by 3.93%. Vice versa, if yields decrease by 1%, the portfolio value would increase by 3.93%. So when we talk about volatility, the question becomes how comfortable is the district with that volatility risk, with the fact that the portfolio value will swing so much with any given change in interest rates.
Okay, thank you.
I think my question may have already been answered, but my concern would be how close we are to a risk by doing this. And I would also mention, unfortunately, we didn't get copies of this part of the report, but I know I'll have a chance to take a look at it prior to this going to the full board. But again, my concern would be obviously having a little longer time gives us that opportunity for a raise and something positive, but how do we know how close we might be to, something that not could happen?
Yeah, I would say with changes like these, it's very hard to, sometimes it's harder to pull the trigger on a longer duration strategy if you're anticipating that rates will rise. But one of the things I think that has been true is that there's never a bad time to start a strategy. The goal is to sort of sit with the strategy over the long run. So we'd have time to really capture those higher returns. And right now the market is paying for that longer duration strategy in the form of steepness in the yield curve.
Yeah. So it's potentially worth it.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that I will say is that, no matter what the strategy is, we're going to be seeing negative returns in a rising rate environment. It just might be a little bit more negative with the 1 to 5 year, but negative nonetheless. And the good news is that we'll be able to capture some better income, which will help the portfolio in the long run. And you will see a higher average return on the portfolio.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Director Corbett, you're correct. We are bringing this detailed level analysis to you for the first time, and we didn't provide you with the slides. We're happy to talk about this again in January when we do present our investment policy. If the committee members feel like more time would be useful, or we could, with your blessing, just kind of start slowly in this new benchmark, whatever your pleasure is. And we do have one member of the public that would like to comment on this item.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. And so are you saying we don't need to do the recommendation today?
If you're more comfortable waiting, I'm okay with that.
Okay. All right. So let's hear our public comment then at this time.
Mr. Abreu, I see you on the Zoom. Would you like to unmute and make your public comment, please?
Okay, thank you very much. So I'll just put the summary, executive summary up front. If you listen to what Ms. Alker is telling you, she's telling you probably the exact right thing that you're going to end up doing.
Would you give us your name again, please? I didn't catch it.
Hi, Kelly Abreu, Mission Peak Conservancy. Ms. Alker is probably giving you the exact right advice here to, if you're going to be moving out in the maturity curve and going longer, you should do so gradually. Of course, the best time to do that is right before rates drop. Of course, we all know rates are going to be going up. That's why she's telling you to go slowly. So let's, it's very, her advice is it's kind of inarguable, except for the problem that rates are going up, which makes it a little bit harder to follow that strategy, but she is telling you to go slowly, so that's fine. Now on to my more important comment here. If you look at the leading lights of investing in these kind of funds, and this is essentially an index fund of short maturity bonds, you could take a quote from Bogle. If investors could only rely on a single factor to select future superior performers and to avoid future inferior performers, it would be fund costs. The record could hardly be clearer. The more the managers and brokers take, the less the investors make. End quote. So the point of this is the single largest factor in this kind of a bond fund is the expense ratio and how much are your managers chewing up in expenses. And I would like to see a big focus on that to see what the expense ratios are. And we haven't heard about that at all. Just I think that it has to be the primary consideration here, not just the length of the portfolio duration. Thank you.
Thank you. So thank you. That's a conclusion of the presentation. Yes. Okay. Do you have any other comments, Deborah?
No, Deb, did you want to just respond to that a little bit?
Sure. So we did have that information in the presentation from PFM, the amount that we pay in fees. And also I can tell you I believe it's eight basis points. So we did do an RFP with for our investment management and about 5 years ago and selected PFM based on providing superior service and also that they were very competitive cost. So the district has done that analysis and the information is in that presentation.
So I think I just, we are running late on time. So the two items before the committee right now is acceptance of the quarterly report. And then if you would like to give us some recommendation on whether you're comfortable with moving the benchmark, or if you'd like to have us talk to you about it a little bit more in the January meeting, either way is fine with us.
I personally am comfortable going forward, but if others want more time, I certainly understand. I do like your recommendation, Deborah, to if we adopt it, to just move slowly. And I know that that is also what Monique is saying. And so, and that's why I'm comfortable moving forward to carefully, to set the policy, but then carefully implement it with an eye to what exactly rates are doing and to give our team the flexibility to do that.
And I have a question. So the next place for this report to go would be to the full board. Is that correct?
The question of duration is really kind of a practice. It's not something that's outlined in our policy per se. So we're just really having this discussion with the finance committee. We were planning on discussing it when we bring forward the investment policy, but it's not something the full board needs to approve.
Because I was just thinking that if it was going to the full board next, it would have an opportunity to have the further discussion about the process and a careful way of putting the process forward there as they would be involved in approving. So we'd be able to move it forward, but also have full discussion with the full board. So are you saying that this decision would only be made by the committee on this issue?
True. It's been treated as an administrative decision for the duration here at the district. The policy does not require a specific duration.
Let me think about that for a moment. I don't know if Director Lane has anything to say on the issue. I know we could have further discussion by the committee, even if we did move it forward today. But I don't know. Director Lane, do you have any thoughts on this? Director Lane, what are your thoughts on this?
No, I'm just listening here, but I always think going slowly on a change like this is best, but I'm not sure about how best to do that.
We can, Monique, would you like to add something to the conversation? Is that your hand up? No, I didn't. That was my cursor. We are very happy to bring this back to the next finance committee in January and just make sure that we've had a full discussion about it.
Would we be concerned waiting till January because it might impact our ability to start our process and the timing with the opportunity to move forward and have good things happen would be impacted?
Investment advisors always tell me not to try to time the market. So, although there could be some, loss of potential earnings, I don't think there's a problem with it at all.
Between now and January.
Although you'll have a whole new finance committee in January, probably.
Yeah,
Oh.
so that, and then that's what I'm saying. Won't it be a new finance committee?
Correct. It
At
will be
that
a new
point,
finance committee. Mhm.
So actually, it wouldn't be a bad idea to have this information, under our belt, and then talk about it again in January with a new committee. Some new brains looking at it, probably. So what would the committee like to do? You want to delay the recommendation until January?
I am still in favor of moving forward, but I want to be respectful of others who are not, who feel like they might need more time, but it won't be us who will have more time at the end of the day. I trust Deborah and Monique and others to roll this out slowly and carefully and in a thoughtful way. And so I'm prepared to give them a green light today.
I can go forward today as well. I know as a board member, even though whether I'm on the committee or not coming up, I know enough about it that I could make a comment if I thought we should slow down later on.
Okay, so I'd like to hear a motion, please.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded to recommend this item to the board. Caitlin, would you do a roll call, please?
Happy to. I'll start with Director Eccles.
Aye.
Thank you. Director Corbett.
Aye.
Thank you. And finally, Chair Lane.
Aye.
Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Very
Thank
complete
you,
report.
Allison. Thank you, Allison.
Our next item is the item number 4, which talks about initiating our general obligation bond financing and for WW. Deborah Spalding.
All right, good afternoon again.
A little louder, please.
All right, how's that? I'm sharing my screen again. Is that all right? You guys see that okay? Trying to advance to the next slide. There we go. So agenda item 4, we are initiating general obligation bond financing and preparing for our 2022 bond issuance. This is something we've talked about a couple of times already in this finance committee. So I'll recap our measure WW bond situation. So back in 2008, the voters approved the Park District to have the authority to issue $500 million in general obligation bonds. So far, we're about roughly halfway through that. We've appropriated $80 million 3 times in 2009, 2013, and 2017. And we are planning to do our next new issuance again in $80 million. And that's the amount that we believe we can spend over roughly a 3 to 5 year time period. We are anticipating that approximately half of the new bonds will be issued as green bonds. And I'll talk more about that in a minute. So here's our core bond team. We have the financial advisors, Anna Sarabian, who will be talking to us in a minute from Fieldman Roll-Ups, and they're our primary advisors in this issuance. We also have our legal counsel, bond and disclosure counsel, and that's Katie Dobson from Jones Hall is the primary attorney who's assisting us. On the district side, we'll have our general manager, CFO, assistant finance officer, and assistant district counsel. So this is just the core team. We'll definitely be reaching out and engaging other staff as needed when questions come up or when that need is there. As part of this new bond issuance, we're going to be we're recommending refunding a small portion of the remaining 2009 bonds that have not already been refunded. So a refunding, you can kind of think of it as like refinancing your mortgage. So you issue new debt, but the proceeds are used to pay off the old debt, but under more favorable terms. We have a debt policy that requires us to only do that should say a refunding, that our refunding has to generate at least 3% savings. And the calculation is that this refunding will generate about 15% net present value of the par amount of the bond. So that's $612,000. And that savings is passed on to our taxpayers. On that point of the cost of the debt to the taxpayers. So we've made a promise to our voters that we'll make sure that we keep within this $10 per 100,000 of assessed valuation. So as we issue the new bonds, we'll make sure that we stay within that in our projections. And we use a very conservative assumption of growth and assessed value when we do that. Just one caveat note, that $10 tax limit is a constraint only at the time that we're issuing the debt. If, knock on wood, something terrible were to happen, we do have to pay off the debt service. So there was a time back during the Great Recession that we did actually slightly exceed that $10 per 100,000 of assessed value, but it is not our intent to do so. And then just a bit more information on the green bonds. So green bonds mean that the proceeds can only be used for environmentally beneficial projects. We have issued our green bonds as certified green bonds. This means that we have a third party verify that we're using the funds only for these green type projects. So we've set up an additional tracking system in our finance software so that we can ensure that we're using the money only for environmentally beneficial projects. And then we have an annual report that we do and an audit that is done just to check that we really are using those funds as we said. Issuing green bonds can be financially beneficial. There's a demand for green bonds in the marketplace, and green issuances are usually oversubscribed, but primarily the reason we're doing that is because it's in alignment with the district's mission and vision. The next steps in the issuance, and I'm going to turn this over to Anna Sarabian from Field and Roll Up in just a second. And she'll talk in more detail about the next steps, but rating presentations are with S&P and Moody's are scheduled for January, or they're not yet scheduled, but they're planned to be in January. We'll be having a special finance committee meeting January 19th to review the financing documents for the bond issuance. And then that will next go to the board of directors for the February 1st meeting. And the competitive sale is scheduled for the first week of March, subject to market conditions. So I think, yeah, that's my last slide. I'm going to turn it over to Anna, and she has her own presentation.
Thank you, Deb. Good afternoon. My name is Anna Sarabian. I'm with Field and Roll Up and Associates, the Park District's financial advisor. While Deb gave you the highlights, today I wanted to walk through a general overview of the interest rate environment from the borrowing side. I know you heard from Monique from an investment side, but now if we can maybe flip around and focus as a borrower, you are really looking for low interest rates. And so that's what I will be reviewing. Let me just see how I can make this on a big screen. And can you please confirm you can see my screen right now?
We can see your screen, but I think it's not in presentation mode quite yet.
How about now?
Now it's in the notes version. So if you go up to display settings and just go ahead and switch that. There you go. Perfect. Thanks, Anna.
Thank you. All right, so just a brief snapshot of the tax-exempt municipal market. Last Friday was quite a volatile event in general for the stock market. The stock market experienced really high volatility as a result of the concerns that the new coronavirus strain named Omicron may impact the global economy and slow down the economic growth. And as a result, stocks fell dramatically. On the flip side of that, the tax-exempt rates actually decreased, which is good from a borrower's perspective. Here, we wanted to provide a snapshot of the historical tax-exempt municipal market rates. And when we talk about tax-exempt muni rates, we use a benchmark off of which we measure the performance of those rates. And that benchmark is called the AAA Municipal Market Data Benchmark, or AAA MMD. And so in the top left of the screen, the chart there in blue bars shows you the range of what those tax-exempt municipal market rates have been going back to 2005. Anywhere across the yield curve for maturities from 1 to 30 years. And so if you focus, for example, on the 1 year, you could see that the lowest it's been, that rate has been going back to 2005, is a little over 0%. And the highest, it was right around 375. And if you go longer for the 30-year rate, you could see that the lowest was right around 1.25, and the highest was close to 6% during that time. Now,
Anna, we're having a little trouble hearing you. Can you talk closer into your mic? Something just changed.
can you hear me better now?
Just go ahead and keep talking. We'll see if we can figure something out on our end. Thanks.
The red line it shows you the current municipal tax-exempt rates. And by current, those were the rates as of October 21 when the presentation was put together. And you could see that, the red line is close to the lower end of the blue bars, meaning that from a historical perspective, rates are still very attractive. At the bottom right, you could see another chart, and again, it shows you the same benchmark for a AAA rated municipal market data tax-exempt rate. And you could see in light green, that's the current rate, the current level of interest rates in 2021. In black, those are the same rates, but a year ago. And then in dark red, you could see the 5 year ago, what the rates were. And you could see that current rates are definitely much lower than what rates were 5 years ago. They are slightly higher on the front end of the curve up through from 1 to 15 years, but kind of on par with the rates 1 year ago. And so why is that important as you consider issuing the next chunk of the measured WW bonds? It's important to know and be aware that the interest rate environment is still attractive. Moving on to the next slide, here we'd like to focus on supply and demand. Although we are a while away from issuing the bonds, it's always good to take a look at what the supply is and the demand is for bonds. Last week, the supply for municipal bonds was pretty light, mainly due to the holiday. And this week, the supply is expected to pick up and be right around $1 billion. When we look to price our measured WW bonds next year, we will try to pick a date that helps us stand out from the competition, and we don't have to fight for investors' interest and have enough supply that's manageable so investors can focus on our bond transaction. From a demand perspective, the chart on the bottom, the top left shows you the monthly flow of municipal bond funds. And what this means is these are the funds that typically purchase bonds. And so you could see there, the green bars are pointing up north, meaning that there have been positive inflows of funds. And those positive inflows of funds demonstrate that there are investors still available, holding cash, looking to invest in municipal bonds. Last week, there were 720 million of inflows that came into the municipal funds, and that made it the 38th consecutive week of municipal bond inflows, which again is a good sign for the tax-exempt market. The bottom right corner of the screen shows you just the supply, and the general highlight is that in 2020 we had a record high municipal bond supply. Weekly averages were pretty dramatic, almost $9 billion. And this year, in 2021, we are right around 9.6 billion. So looking to surpass those weekly averages, and as the year overall, the supply seems to be on par with what we saw last year. I'll take a pause here and see if there are any questions on the market before I move into the financing part of the presentation.
Okay, are there any questions from the committee?
No.
Okay.
No, but Anna, if you could move quickly, we have about 10 minutes, I think, to finish this item.
Yes, absolutely, and that's plenty of time. So here we just summarized the district's measures over the years. Today we're focusing on measure WW. As Deb Spalding already highlighted, we are halfway through issuing the maximum authorized amount. We're planning now to issue about 80 million, and here on the next slide, you could see a summary of the Park District's long-term outstanding debt. In addition to the measure WW, there are also the 2012 promissory notes, which are outstanding, and they could present an opportunity to be refunded next year. And we will be talking to you again about that sometime next year. Here on the next slide, we are considering issuing the 80 million of new series of measure WW bonds. There are two approaches to issuing those bonds. The first one is just focusing on the new money component, meaning just issuing the 80 million in bonds. As we discussed earlier, about 50% of those will be designated as green bonds, and the debt service will be structured to fall within the constraint that was promised to the voters. However, there is a small piece remaining from the 2009A general obligation bonds that's refundable, and we could take advantage of combining that with the new money issuance and benefit from economies of scale and scope. And so, as Deb Spalding mentioned, doing that combination would result in positive net present value savings from the refunding component of over 15%, and while at the same time achieving the goal of issuing the new money bonds. That combination could be beneficial both in terms of locking in the savings and passing those savings to the taxpayers, but also understanding that if you just left the 2009A outstanding, they're very small, about 4 million, and it's unlikely you will be refunding them as a standalone bond series down the road, just because it will be very inefficient to do so. There have been conversations about a new administration building in the future, and that discussion may be factored in when analyzing the potential to refinance the 2012 promissory notes. Those currently produce really high savings, and they are callable as soon as early next year. And so another component to keep in mind for 2022. And with that, let me pause here and see if there are any questions.
So when you're talking about the new administration building, are you saying that our issuing bonds and doing the refunding might affect our financing the new building? Is that what you said?
No, Anna is talking about the refinancing of the 2009 bonds, and that there's two opportunities to do it. Combining it with the new issue of WW, or if the market doesn't seem like it's beneficial to do that refunding at that time in March, that we could look at doing a refunding when we issue promissory notes for construction of the tenant improvements. So that would be the other recommended timing for that.
I see. Okay, are there any questions from the committee?
No, and it looks like part of the recommendation is to allow this to move forward to the full board to look and see if they also feel comfortable with the possible change for the bond issuance of Measure WW and refunding the other item. Right?
Yeah, so if we move this forward to the board, this does not include the decision on exactly when we'll do the refunding, right?
Well,
Or does?
I think we're looking at the market, and we are feeling that March is a really good time to go to the market based on the first slides that Anna put forward with the supply and demand. So we are recommending that we start moving forward, bring this to the finance committee again in January when we're a little bit closer, and then to the board at the first meeting in February. I believe, is that the right schedule, Deb?
I think it's February 1st is what we
Right.
had planned for.
And
So we'll give you that opportunity to keep an eye on what may happen in March.
correct. So we still have time to tinker with it, to watch the markets. We had originally planned on issuing bonds this fall, but we hadn't spent all of our WW money. And as we just talked about, the market was pretty saturated. So our recommendation, as we're spending down our current proceeds, would be to go in March or very soon afterwards. But it would come back to the finance committee, and then it would go to the board of directors before a sale would actually happen.
I would be happy to make the motion on this item.
Is that you, Ellen?
Yes, it's Ellen.
Okay. And Elizabeth, a second?
Sure, I'll second. Yeah, I don't have any questions, so happy to second.
Okay, the roll, please.
Thank you. We'll start again with Director Eccles.
Aye.
Thank you. And Director Corbett.
Aye.
Thank you. And finally, Chair Lane.
Aye.
Thank you.
All right. So we are sending that forward.
Yes.
And I know we had talked about doing the bonds last year, but now we're moving it to another time. Okay. All right, thank you. So next we turn to item 5, which is our retirement plans, investment policy review and update.
All right.
We're having a full meeting here.
Yeah.
I do apologize. We have a lot of dense information today, partly because we don't have a meeting in December, and also we had canceled a meeting or so earlier in the year. So you're getting it all today.
All right, good afternoon, Deborah Spalding, Assistant Finance Officer. And so this is a review of the investment policy for the East Bay Regional Park District retirement plan, sometimes known as the Transamerica retirement plans. So these EBRPD retirement plans were what the district had before we joined CalPERS. You may recall earlier this year, we did an RFP for retirement plan administration for these plans. And from that process, we selected PARS to be the administrator for the retirement plan. And they utilize Highmark Capital Management as the investment sub-advisor, and then US Bank is the trustee. So we are currently working on the transition to PARS from Transamerica, and the retirees can expect to receive their first payments from PARS in January. So we're here before you today because as part of that transition to PARS and to Highmark, we want to update our investment policy. And we're not making very significant changes, so it's pretty similar to our prior investment policy for these funds, but it's in a different format, the format that's recommended to us by Highmark. We're also incorporating a more conservative investment strategy because the plans have reached a good funded, a much higher funded status over the past year because we were invested fairly substantially in equities. And as you know, the stock market did fairly well this year so far. So we've achieved a higher funded status. So we're now going to be moving into a more conservative investment strategy. So more in bonds and less in stocks, and consequently we'll have a lower expected rate of returns. We're also changing from a non-discretionary to a discretionary relationship for investment management. And what this means is that previously we were in charge of deciding how to invest those funds. The Park District was making decisions and we would execute them ourselves. We're now moving to have Highmark make those decisions for us and to execute things for us based on this investment policy. So the policy is relatively similar with this more conservative strategy, but Highmark will actually be implementing the strategy. And we will continue to have quarterly reports from Highmark and an annual presentation to the Finance Committee from Highmark. We'll also continue to review the investment policy regularly and update it as needed. So we have Randy Yurchuk here from Highmark, and I believe I just saw Dennis from PARS join us. So if you have anything you'd like to add to this, or if you have any questions there, they are available to answer them.
And I'll just add, I think the system that we had before was quite clunky, and it took a lot of paperwork and administration to manage the portfolio. So this is really a way of streamlining it and putting into this new strategy, which does reflect the higher funded status of this closed plan. And I think you can recall that we have our pension trust is also the investment advisors are Highmark. So we've been working with them in that capacity as well.
And Madam Chair, I would just say I'm very I would be very approval, even if we don't hear reports from these two groups, to have them in place to do the to work and the advisory and give us the advisory information to make good decisions with regard to the investment for this. So I'm all ready to be supportive. That's what I'm saying.
Okay, thank you. So are we going to have a short presentation, or this is it?
I don't think we have a presentation, just
Okay.
if there were any complicated questions that Deb and I needed help on, we have our helpers.
Okay, so, and we did talk about this at an earlier Finance Committee meeting, so.
We've been working on the transition
Mhm.
of the retirement funds to PAR. So you have met this team before, and they've just helped us to update the investment policy that was already in place to work with our new strategy and with the new administrative efficiencies.
Okay. So Elizabeth, do you have any questions or want to make a motion?
Just a comment, and then I'm happy to make a motion. So I just want to welcome the new team, PARS and Highmark Capital. I know we had some complaints about the ability, the customer support and other issues with the previous company. And so I'm very happy to have this change and transition and really look forward to good things from you all. So thank you very much. Oh, and so I will, so I'd like to move a motion to adopt the proposal.
And I happily seconded it. I think it is the smart thing to do to have their professional experience as advice for us. So happy to second the item.
Okay, so it's been moved and seconded, and I agree with your comment, Elizabeth. Roll call, please.
Thank you. We'll start again with Director Eccles.
Aye.
Thank you, Director Corbett.
Aye.
And finally, Chair Lane.
Aye.
Thank you.
All right, it passes, and we'll send that on to the board. Thank you very much. Then our sixth item is the general fund and other governmental fund financial reports, third quarter.
Good afternoon. I'm Michelle Strawson O'Hara, Assistant Finance Officer. Today, I'm presenting the third quarter 2021 General Fund and Other Governmental Funds Financial Report. We'll start with an overview of the General Fund revenue and expenditures. You can see that the actual revenues through September 30th were $92.5 million, or 53.1% of budget, which is as expected for this point in the year. Revenues are $5 million higher than the prior year, primarily due to an increase in property tax revenues and charges for services. Actual expenditures of $128.3 million were 65.3% of budget and $7.2 million greater than prior year, primarily due to an increase in salaries and benefits and transfers out. If we drill down on the general fund found on attachment A of the report, we can see the details of the general fund revenue and expenditures by category and also by division. You'll see notes at the bottom of the page where there are variances against budget of over under 10%. The most significant variances in expenditures relate to unexpended supplies, services, and capital outlay, which are on track compared to budget when encumbrances are included. As a reminder, the district uses encumbrances to reserve or set aside budgeted funds to ensure that actual expenditures do not exceed the available budget. Salaries and benefits also appear under budget. However, retroactive COLA payments are not yet reflected as they are payable in November and December, and therefore will be included in the fourth quarter reports. Attachment B of the report summarizes all the other funds, special revenue funds, which include our Measure FF, CFD, lighting and landscaping districts and zones of benefits, our project funds, debt service funds, and our internal service funds, which pay for district-wide costs of workers' compensation, general liability insurance, major infrastructure and equipment, as well as employee benefit claims. And that concludes my presentation. Does anyone have any questions?
Okay, do we have any questions or comments?
I have no questions.
Yeah, let me hear from the board first, and then we'll have public comment.
No questions at this point. Thank you.
All right. No questions right now, so let's hear from the public.
To do a lap around the building.
Oh, a public who is present.
Sorry?
A present public.
Yes, present public. Good afternoon, members of the board and General Manager Landreth and district staff. My name is Meadow Darcy, and I'm representing ASBE Local 2428.
I asked that the board take a look at page 92 that has a lot of the anomalies that are pointed out, anomalies that are pointed out on some of the budgetary allocations there or expenditures, I should say. There are a lot of notations that talk about staff vacancies. It does seem that about 5 out of 7 of the major divisions have significant staff vacancies. And the union understands that HR is doing their best to fill the vacancies. However, there are quite a few positions as we dig through them that are falling through the cracks. Positions are sitting stagnant, not being filled, not being posted, things like that. And it really creates a backlog of positions. So we would ask that the board instruct general manager to ensure that these positions are filled in a timely basis and on a consistent basis, and that any type of delays are looked into to avoid that in the future. We feel like when we have lots of staff vacancies, not only is it much more difficult for employees to do their jobs, it also creates less service to the public. And it also creates an environment where the district may have to choose to contract out that work because they need it to be done quickly. And so a lot of times how we get here or how we get to the point where we start to contract out, when we look back, there were some opportunities there to fill positions. So that is our request.
Okay, thank you for your comments. I think we talked about vacancies earlier as a different way we're going to reflect them in the budget. Does
Yes,
anybody want to
and
respond to this?
I mean, I think this is a cumulative variance over the first, 3 quarters of the year, and we've made a lot of progress, but the numbers still show any, variances at the beginning of the year. So I know HR is working hard. I think they are pretty well staffed and have systems in place for moving forward in a positive way.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions from the board, or could I have a motion, please?
So moved.
Okay, Eccles moved.
I will second.
And Corbett seconded. You take a roll call, please.
Thank you. We'll start again with Director Eccles.
Aye.
Thank you. Director Corbett.
Aye.
Thank you. And finally, Chair Lane.
Aye.
Thank you.
All right, that's accepted unanimously and sent on to the board. Then our final item is a informational item on job order contracting, the quarterly report.
Thank you, Director Lane. Christina Kelchner, Assistant General Manager of ASD. This item will be presented over Zoom by Lisa Gorgian and Ren Bates. So Lisa and Ren, if you could turn on your cameras and share your slides. Thank you.
Caitlin, can you let us share?
You should be able to share at this time.
Okay, I guess my camera's turned off, so.
It's pulled up now, Lisa.
Oh, thank you. Let's see. Oh, here we go. All right, wonderful. Thank you so much. So my name is Lisa Gorgian. I'm here, the Chief of Design and Construction, here with Ren Bates to give this informational quarterly update on our job order contracting program. Projects that utilize job order contracts have already been determined to be put out for competitive bidding due to their size and/or complexity. So today for this presentation, I'm going to provide an overview, an update on the cost verification that we just completed, and Ren will give an update on current projects utilizing the job order contracting contractors. These updates are all done in accordance with the adopted JOC policy and procedures. All right, so the JOC policy identifies that annually staff will verify the accuracy using using a sample of our labor, materials, and equipment unit prices on the projects that we deliver using the JOC procurement process. We do this as a best management practice for oversight to confirm that JOC process, this procurement process is performing as intended to serve the district. Because we're going to talk about cost verification, I just wanted to provide a reminder that the job order contract program is kind of akin to having an on-call contractor, or we have contractors that have been awarded through a competitive low bid process. District works with our consultant, the Gordian Group, to develop a construction task catalog. So this catalog, it's basically set unit prices for common construction items. So everybody charges the same amount to do the same work or for the same materials. The competitive bid process, how we award these, is that each contractor has an adjustment factor, which is kind of like a markup. And so it's the low bid, that markup, that's low bid, that's how the contractors get selected. So let me keep going here. So when we're pricing projects, the contractors use the same, they use all the same unit prices, and then they multiply it by their adjustment factor, and that's gives us the total price for projects, the projects that we're doing. So, and this is all to say, annually, we want to verify this because, the district spends, these are public funds. We want to make sure that they're in line with how the market rate of what things cost, and that there's not discrepancies in a lot of discrepancies in costs using this procurement method. So we just it's a good exercise for us. It's a good exercise to just make sure that that we are protecting the district assets, the public assets. So to do this, we developed a scope, and we looked to confirm that the costs of completed projects using a sample of a couple completed projects, looking at that the labor that was charged and the materials that were charged, those were all part of the project that was being done, that they met the specifications. We're in the Bay Area. We wanted to make sure that the prices were in line with the Bay Area market prices and prevailing wages. That the items that they identified, that the contract identified they were going to do, were necessary and used, and that if there were changes, they were appropriate and reasonable. So we chose two projects to review, a paving project and that was done by a general paving contractor, and then the restoration project that was done by a general engineering contractor. So what we found was that in reviewing all these different aspects that go into delivering these projects by a contractor, that the variances were between what was priced and then what the final work that was completed. The variances in the costs were between, less than 1% and 2.5%. And generally that generally the differences in these costs were due to just kind of it's kind of a general thing is when you're estimating from a design, there's usually some differences in terms of what you actually see in the field. So that was sort of the prices. Additionally, our verification process showed that the costs were within range of the Bay Area market prevailing wage rates. There was no irregularities, and when things were needed, they were needed for a reason. So sometimes we find that we've started a project, we identify something in the field that requires an additional amount of excavation or something that should have been in the plans but wasn't, and so we have to add that in. So and those are pretty common for whether you're using a job order contracting procurement method or going out for a single project to low bid. So we found that how this verification process was good. It reaffirmed that it's a good value to the district, so I think we found it was a good effort. It was a good effort for us to learn. And also, I think just it reinforced that it's working well. So with that, I'm going to pause. I'm sorry that I was talking a little fast to see if there's any questions. And then if not, I'm going to turn it over to Ren.
Okay, are there any questions from the board for Lisa?
Director Lane, I was just going to add a comment.
Hmm?
Could I add a comment?
Sure.
Thank you, Lisa. I also wanted to mention that David Sumner, our audit manager, is part of this process. And since this is our second audit, he's worked with the team through this cost verification process on the first audit and reviewing the results of the second audit. And he got the final reports for review as well. So he can answer
Thank you,
any
Deborah.
questions.
And thank you to you and David. Thank you. It was definitely a team effort.
Okay, so let's go forward.
Great. Ren Bates, Capital Program Manager. Thank you, Lisa, for the verification cost summary. I'll make this brief. It's been a long meeting. So last time we were here for the update, we had just executed contracts. As a reminder, we did 3 A's, which are general engineering, 3 B's, and 2 paving contracts. So the list in front of you are the projects that have been priced, and we have an approved project cost, and construction has begun on several of these. As a reminder, the Gordian Group cost is 5% of the total approved project cost, and that includes all of their fees to help us with the price verification and setting up and even getting out to bid. So that's what that cost is. If there are any questions, and again, as a reminder, these projects are run through several departments, being design and construction, finance management services, and roads and trails department through maintenance and skilled trades. So these are the ones that we have formalized pricing on. Next slide, please. If there are any questions on that, we can move to the next slide. Here's some other projects we are currently pricing. So these are projects that we're working on getting pricing for, and that process is verification with staff. So the contractor will take a pass at it. Our Gordian Group, Zeb, who's our consultant that works directly with the district as a representative Gordian, takes a look at that. The project manager takes a look at it, and there's a lot of vetting back and forth before we come to this final project. So that's what these 6 projects are currently in right now. And then lastly, I have a couple of photos to show you the projects that we're working on. These again aren't quite in construction, but We're going to be doing some repairs, the dry creek to this rock wall that's shown here. Next slide. We've done several projects out here at Cogswell, Hayward Shoreline, Cogswell Marsh to do the bridge repairs. Again, what they do is they jacket these piers that are, as you can see in this photo, deteriorating. I think this is the second or third year we've done this. The time we have a limited time to do this work because of environmental constraints, and so job order contracting allows us to do this over several seasons, which is a benefit. Next slide, please. And lastly, we'll look at repairing this West Shore Trail slide as part of one of the projects. That's all the photos I have now. Hopefully when we come back in 3 months, we'll have more photos of projects as they're in construction. That's weather dependent as it is, but that completes the presentation today. Happy to answer any questions at this time.
Okay, on the Bridgyard building improvement, is that are we putting the additional restrooms in? Is that what that improvement is?
No, that's a audio video. It's a electric system. It's for the audio visual. It's to help with the speakers and some electrical work. That's what's happening at the Bridgyard. It is not the restroom.
Okay. All right, from the committee, are there any comments or questions on these various projects or
No.
the whole thing? No?
Thank you for the report. I don't have any questions.
Okay. All right, not seeing any others.
Chair Lane, we do have one public comment from Meadow Darcy as well.
Okay, so we have a public comment. Please go ahead.
Good afternoon, members of the board, General Manager Landreth. My name is Meadow Darcy. I am Chief Steward for ASME Local 2428. I was making a comment on number 7, the job order contracting. The union continues to have concerns about the use of outside contractors for work that can be done by union workers with union wages and health benefits. One example is paving contracts. We have a roads and trails crew that can do this work, and yet we spend millions of dollars every year to complete this paving year after year. There doesn't seem to be a mechanism to review these contracts to ensure that the repetitive nature of the work would justify hiring more staff to complete the work at fair union wages and benefits. We request that the board direct management to review contracts that occur year after year and determine if the work can be done in a more cost-effective manner by using existing staff or by hiring new staff. I brought this issue up at several board finance meetings, and I have yet to get a response to how the district will address this. It does seem that there are, again, issues that are falling through the cracks. Sometimes it's the combination of vacancies that roll into then needing the work to be done quickly and then contracting out of the work. And we would like to avoid this and create more good union jobs for people instead of paying contractors to do this work. So I just wanted to say that I do appreciate the work that the district does. I think everybody has the best of intentions when contracting work. However, it does seem that there's a piece missing. When I was sort of looking at the JOC program and looking at all of the considerations, one of the considerations that I didn't see on that list was, can we do this work in-house? Or can we do this work with by hiring additional staff? Or does this level of work, the cost of this work, justify hiring additional staff? You know, is this repetitive work that's happening year after year after year? So it is a question that I think should be on the minds of district management as they go through these contracts. And I would like to ask the board to have that be something that management is considering on a regular basis as part of the review process of JOC. Thank you.
Thank you. I think it's been discussed as to how these decisions are made. And are you saying that the union doesn't understand how the decisions are made? Or no one has talked to you about the way the decisions are made?
I don't know if it's that we don't know how the decisions are made, and I don't even think that anyone's making decisions, in opposition necessarily. I think that there's simply not a review mechanism in place to ask that question. So for example, if work is happening year after year after year, I don't think it's anybody's job, for example, to say, wait a minute, why are we doing this year after year? I think it's just Jock is working, we're getting the work done, check the box, as opposed to really taking a step back and saying, maybe we should look at hiring staff for this.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so this is that concludes our regular meeting information. Oop, where's my agenda? And thank you for your public comments. Are there any committee comments at this time?
Well, I would just like to say, first of all, thank you everyone for your reports. And I also appreciate the comments that Meadow made on both of these last two items. I know we can't address those comments directly, but according to the rules. So, but I do want to thank her for being here and present in this meeting and raising some very good points. And again, thanks everybody for a good and productive meeting. And yeah, we'll see you at the big board meeting.
All right, so we'll see you next at our regular board meeting, which is going to be held in the evening. And we'll see each other virtually or not. I don't have any additional comments. And I don't see any from Director Corbett, and so the meeting is adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you.